Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming along to our discussion on all things sync, music supervision, music for gaming, AI, the end of the world as we know it, etc. We'll cover everything. We've got some very distinguished guests today, so I think you can do your own introductions. That'd be useful. So we start with Matt. Just say who you are, what you do.
My name's Matt. I am head of music and gaming partnerships at a company called Laced. We're a full-service creative agency for the video game industry, and we also have a video game record label that puts out game soundtracks on vinyl.
I'm Sergio. I'm a music supervisor and creative director at Synchronicity Music. We also work mostly on video games, video game trailers.
I'm Scott. I run Woodwork Music, which is a sync agency representing independent labels and artists trying to get their music licensed into ads, games, TV shows, films.
Scott, are you willing to give us a little bit of a breakdown of what that actually is? I think to a lot of, even to people who work in bands and have been established for a bit, the world of publishing and sync and is a bit of a mystery sometimes. They've not got a deal and not had one. They don't know what it is. So just willing to just give us a little insight into what that means.
Yeah, I'm kind of a middleman between music supervisors who are often licensing the music and the rights holders like the record labels, the publishers, the artists themselves. I essentially work alongside them to try and draw more attention to their music, to try and secure opportunities, similar to what is this going down? Similar to what perhaps you would find at a bigger record label. They might have a sync team in-house. I'm kind of that person for smaller record labels that don't necessarily have a big enough team to kind of deal with that stuff themselves. So I'm doing a lot of pitching on briefs that are getting sent out, but I'm also just trying to establish and strengthen relationships with people who are kind of making decisions about what music's going in what project. Yeah, that's kind of the bulk of what I do.
Excellent, thank you. Sergio, you've been in the industry for quite a while. I think we met 5 years ago, I think, but we've been working a long time before that. Could you just give us a little bit of a potted history of where you started and where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So this is my 25th year in sync. I started as a consultant 25 years ago for probably the first music supervision company, kind of focusing on video games called Couch Life. I fell into it totally by mistake. It wasn't. I love video games. I love music, and I was excited to hear that you could get paid to put one on the other. So yeah, I joined there. I was there for a number of years, pitching to a lot of games companies, games publishers, including PlayStation, who then decided to hire me to set up their licensing music department on a game that was being researched and developed and had been greenlit, which was going to need a lot of music, and that was SingStar. So we kind of set the department up. SingStar was a karaoke game that was very successful on PlayStation. I was there for a number of years, working across some very cool games, Gran Turismo and lots of other titles, and then I got poached by Activision Blizzard, who wanted to do the same with Guitar Hero that we'd done with SingStar. So I went over there, spent 4 or 5 years over there. And then since then, I've been working as a supervisor, occasionally working in other companies. So I met Damien while I was working at Ninja Tune, the record label, and working their catalogue, and their publishing catalogue just isn't music, across games, film, TV, and advertising. And I set Synchronicity up back in May 2020, shortly after I left Ninja Tune.
Great. Matt, you're a journalist originally and still are. What brought you into the world of music and gaming? What brought you into that world?
I think so. I spent about 10 years of my life working as a freelance journalist, like interviewing video game composers, music supervisors, people like Sergio and stuff, like just learning more about the process of getting music into video games, because as a musician, that's something I was always fascinated about. Like, it's interesting, like you were saying, like the idea of getting music into games and getting paid for it, like that's really cool. So after a while, after like interviewing more and more people, I was like, I think there's a gap between the video game industry and the music industry, and I think that's something that all of us are like trying to solve. So I eventually started a newsletter just writing about the intersection of video games and music, and then an opportunity came up at Laced, and I was like, rather than interviewing people and learning more about music for video games, I want to play a part in trying to get music into video games and pitching creative ideas for artists. So that's how I ended up where I am now, basically.
Amazing. And Scott, you've, I mean, you're also a quite successful musician. I say quite so, damning with faint praise, quite successful. But you're doing really well with the music as well. How did you get into this world?
So I started through an internship when I was doing my degree in music production. Always been a major film and music buff, and just never really kind of had the insight into what jobs in those industries was like. So I started asking questions when I was studying and seeing where there might be any opportunities in the north, because notoriously there are fewer in this area of the country than there are perhaps down south. And yeah, funnily enough, one of my lecturers actually knew somebody who was doing this company in Salford, Woodwork Music. So I got my start while I was still studying, and then after I graduated, I just got kept on. That was, I don't know, 11 years ago, something now. And then when the previous owner retired, I took over part of the business. So again, like I was asking questions, and I was trying to sort of find a way into the music industry somehow, but I kind of stumbled into it, and I think that's often the case with these things. Is you either have to carve out a niche for yourself, or you find a way in through a door that you never necessarily knew existed. And that's certainly kind of what happened for me. It just so happened that this job was kind of, appealed to all of my interests. But yeah, it was fortuitous, but you do sort of make your own luck, I think, in certain ways, just by asking questions and being curious.
I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about, if you're in the world of music education and somewhere like this, you start to learn that these doors are there to be opened, and when you haven't been through this process, you do kind of drift into things, and suddenly, I'm a manager, I'm a sync agent. If any of you have questions as we're talking, feel free to raise your hands, and I'll pick on you, by the way. Sergio, the process of hearing music and being pitched music and getting it onto a game, how does, I know it's probably a long process, but can you give us an insight into how that actually works in reality?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it very much depends on the type of game. So I'll give you an example. Sadly, one of the studios that we were working with that hasn't survived, there's been a bit of a bloodbath in the gaming industry over the last year and a half, 2 years, I guess, like there has been in tech world and in the music world as well. But probably a good example of, a game we were approached, an action game that we were approached to look at, probably about 4 years away from release. So, we were actually looking at early concept documents with the narrative, the story in the game, a few characters, a few bits of artwork. And so then it was really just about getting under the skin of the story of the game, the period that it was set, and that then dictated some of the music. So with this project, there was going to be a lot of commercial licensed music, but also there was going to be a score as well. So an opportunity to collaborate with a composer or some composers who would all collaborate with each other, or even recording artists. So that was a great example of when you get involved really nice and early, and you can really get under the skin of it. And, the more time you have, the more creative you can get. So on that type of game, that's the process. And then, lots of ideas, playlists doing the rounds. Then we work on a lot of music titles. So I guess with my background on SingStar and Guitar Hero, we tend to get a lot of developers and publishers coming to us. A game like Let's Sing that we work on every year, which is a karaoke console game, it's a totally different sort of way that we work on that. Generally, the developer comes to us with a list of songs that their different territories want to get in the game. We will then do a lot of research. You know, I guess it's less creative than the other type of game where you're just trying to get music to help the narrative. This is more, has it done very well? Has it hit the top 5, top 10 in these territories? Has it got certain categorizations? You know, the game goes out to quite a young demographic, so are the lyrics clean? Is the video content clean? You know, there's no drinking, there's no drug taking in there. Is it fun to sing song? I always remember being working on SingStar at PlayStation and having our French department going, we must have Daft Punk in the game. And I'm like, okay, which song? It's a karaoke game. We want Around the World. We want Around the World. It'd be great for marketing. And I'm like, it'd be great for marketing, not so great for gameplay. You know, it's like 3 words repeated about 170 times. Not much fun, is it? So yeah, it kind of depends on the genre, but generally, the best work you can do is to get in there as early as possible, because then you can do some really exciting things when you've got time and can get really creative.
There was, in fact, I'm not going to go there right now, but we will touch on AI because there was something we were talking about before, which is still blowing my mind after you told me about it. So we'll come to that in a minute. But that process compared to a film, for example, or a TV series, I imagine there's parallels and huge differences as well. I was listening to, I think it was Ricky Gervais was talking about Afterlife, the Netflix thing, where he'd actually chosen the songs way before they even filmed it, I think, and then so had a budget for clearance of those tracks, which was a clever way of doing it. So he made sure he had those songs. But I imagine that's quite an unusual scenario, Scott. How does it usually work?
Yeah, I mean, the story I was remember in that regard is Edgar Wright, when he did Baby Driver, wrote all of the tracks in the script and said, don't ever do that, because if a song is that integral to the actual kind of storytelling, you can bet that the fee that you pay for that license is going to be that much. You know, you can add a 0 to the end, basically. Yeah, I mean, it's all kinds of scenarios. It can be a last-minute replacement for something that they were unable to clear because of a sample, or just because it was too expensive, or, you know, yeah, as Sergio was saying, you might be involved at a much earlier stage and might get a bit more creative, you know, room to breathe. But yeah, it can be all sorts of things. I think the smart thing in some cases is to bring people in early, but then I've been in situations where you almost feel you brought in too early and that you're actually kind of doing somebody else's research for them, and you think, well, it would be better in this scenario. More often with ads, I would say, than TV or film. You feel like you're kind of doing somebody else's role in ruling out what it shouldn't be. And it would be better if they came to you with a more clear and well-defined brief. So yeah, it really varies. It's kind of different on project to project. And then, you know, budget's always a consideration as well. That the majority of catalog that I work with is you know, lesser known than you know, some of the bigger copyrights. So often I'm working with tighter budgets, and that presents its own set of, you know, limitations as well. Yeah, it's a real range of scenarios.
Matt, you were talking about the bridge between the industry and gaming. Where are the gaps in that relationship?
I think the biggest gap is because I get pitched music quite a lot, and one of the biggest challenges I have is people blindly pitching me stuff with kind of no research done into what kind of game studios we work with, what titles we've previously synced music for. And when I do get an email and it's a very, like, you can tell it's been personalized, it's bespoke, and it's like, hey, I'm getting in touch because we loved the soundtrack for, let's say, Lords of the Fallen or something, and we loved the music in that. So I am pitching you this artist because I have done my homework and I think they would be a great fit for the next game or whatever else. I think that's probably, I don't do anything in film or TV, but I'd say that's probably one of the most important things about games, especially when you've got like single player narrative adventure games and you've got a creative director involved who really, really knows what they want. You need to be pitching them, showing that you've done your homework, because I think any music supervisor, like, they get so many emails every single day, do you know what I mean? Kind of going, can listen to this, listen to that. And if you want to make your music stand out, you need to do that initial homework for games and show that you've done your research. I think that's probably the biggest disconnect I find sometimes when music people pitch me. It's very clear who has looked into what we work with and what kind of music we place, as opposed to those people who haven't done that research.
Yeah. I think that goes across the board on all media, to be honest with you. You know, I'll get an email, I'll get a contact on LinkedIn sometimes going, oh, you know, and I try and get back to everyone, because actually, as a supervisor, you want to make sure that you're tapped into as much music out there as you can, right? You know, there are obviously labels and publishers curating it for you, but there's a lot of great stuff out there that hasn't been signed. But, you know, I'll get a message, oh, yeah, I've had a look at your website. I'd love to get my music into film. I'm like, you had a look at a website? We don't do film. It's one of those, or it's like, so I think, you know, do some initial stuff. You know, I equally get a little bit frustrated when you hear some of the American oh yeah, you know, you should research this stuff in Hollywood Reporter. You know, it's like, look, you're only putting music to picture. Let's not make it anything that it's not. I think you can get a little bit precious, but just you know, approach someone that specify, you know, Laced, for example. Yeah, I'd love to get my music onto adverts. So like, we do gay, you know, I think that initial thing, you know, it might stop you from getting back to someone.
And I think the thing about games is as well, like, depending on the franchise, on the game genre, they're going to have very different soundtracks. Like FIFA, going back to the early FIFAs, that was all like upcoming indie, wanted like British indie and stuff. Like, you wouldn't be pitching, like back in the day, you wouldn't have pitched like drum and bass or whatever FIFA. It's like an immediate no. Similarly, GTA, that's got like an eclectic soundtrack, but you wouldn't pitch like folk music or stuff, do you know what I mean? It's kind of just like a no-go. So I think depending on the game franchise, what you'll find is most big franchises have like a sonic identity that's quite clear and tied to like a couple of like specific genres. So you don't need to spend, like, if you're not familiar with the games industry, you don't need to spend days, weeks, months like researching and studying, but you do need to have an idea. If you're pitching a game, like a music supervisor for a game franchise, just know what their games sound like, because you might be a great fit or your music just might not be suitable.
This is where we then find out GTA 6 has a folk radio station.
Which begs the question, is there, across adverts, TV, film and gaming, are there some genres that will never work on gaming? Are there some genres that will never really work on? I suppose all genres are going to work in TV and advertising. Is there some that you just like, no, we just don't touch that because it's never going to work?
If you hear some of the catalogue that I work with, this will probably make sense, but I don't think there is. I think anything could be used creatively if it's if it's the right fit, or sometimes if it isn't the right fit, you do something that's subversive or, you know, challenges people's expectations, you know, and that can be something it feels a bit gimmicky now, but, you know, putting black metal on a car insurance ad or something like that, or it can be something, you know, more avant-garde that's just you would not expect to see on an ad. So yeah, I would say no. I think certainly there are sonic identities for certain franchises, but I think those are subject to change as well. You know, like you say, you know, the early FIFA games was indie, but now it is much more eclectic. So it depends. You know, I think,
And is that because people's tastes are more eclectic? Is it? I mean, has Spotify developed? Is that, you know, people have kind of not really aware of where music's come from that anymore? It's just there.
Yeah.
Has that changed the landscape for you?
I think so, yeah. I think people in general seem to have a broader depth of knowledge when it comes to, you know, different genres of music. And yeah, because it's all offered up on one platform, there's not necessarily a designation between, it's not as tribal or era specific, it's just, you might hear something that was written in the 50s and then something that was written yesterday in the same playlist, so it's, I think consumers of music, the way that we listen to music has changed. So as a result, the expectation is maybe a bit different.
I think the way of licensing music, or at least curating music for certain game franchises, has evolved as well. I know, like, going back to FIFA, back in the day, there used to be very much, we want the biggest and the best kind of thing, even like, because that was indie at the time, right, in the 90s and early 90s, whereas nowadays, I look at the soundtracks now for FIFA games, and it's a lot of like upcoming independent artists, because I think the head of music there, Steve Schnurr, I think he wants to get in on what
Discovery
artists,
platform.
Yeah, literally. Yeah,
That's how they're
yeah.
marketing themselves, right? Now,
Yeah.
it's come to us. You're going to hear about all the great bands and all the great music that will be breaking just after they've been in our game. And if you look at, my son plays FIFA a lot, and he'd get into tracks that then months later you'd hear on the radio and hear in the charts. So I think they've very purposefully turned FIFA into this another platform to hear music and discover new artists.
My band was actually in the last FIFA game, so I can attest to that. It's definitely, we were definitely an emerging artist at the time, and we got a lot of interesting responses to our music because it's, I don't know, it was quite a bold choice, I thought, for a FIFA soundtrack, but apparently, they are looking into interesting subgenres and subcultures as well. So
How was that for you then as a band? I'm guessing you got new fans in from that, going, "Hey, heard you guys through FIFA." Really?
Yeah, it can be difficult to quantify, to be honest. We certainly got a boost in streaming numbers, and there was a lot of hate on our YouTube channel as well, saying that our music was terrible. But then we actually saw a real spike in royalties, which we kind of weren't expecting, because we've had our music licensed in TV and film and stuff before, but I think this was probably the first game, and the actual kind of back end royalties that we got after the first year was pretty significant. So that can really help in a lot of ways. Like I say, it's kind of hard to quantify from the, who's buying a record after they play the game and hear our music, or I don't know. That is a bit tougher to say.
Yeah, we placed, so weirdly, a music supervisor, many of which were also in bands and musicians, but he's a friend of mine who works at Pure Sync. And he was in a band called Louis and the Shakes that I really liked. I remember him sending the first album to me, very kind of Queens of the Stone Age, which I love. So I was like, great. We started to work on a, I guess, Guitar Hero type game, but for VR, called Unplugged. So it was an air guitar game that came out 4 or 5 years ago. And I remember calling Louis and saying, look, I'm going to pitch one of the tracks from the first album for it. I think it would work really well. I was just getting in touch just because I saw one of your posts the other day, and it sounds like you guys are working on your second album. He's like, yeah, we are. Let me send you that. So anyway, I ended up pitching a track from the first album, a track from the second album. Track from the second album ended up making the game. And I guess like you could see like streaming peaks just as the game had come out. We managed to get them onto the trailer as well for the game, the out of context trailer for it. And they did see, quite a reasonable pickup off the back of the game. They didn't get too much crap from being in the game, thankfully. Although maybe they weren't telling me about the crap that they got. But I think it's a great discovery tool, no doubt about it.
So AI, we've always got every panel. You've got to talk about AI, and I think it's really interesting. We've got a guest in later, actually, Jeremy from Everything. A lot of conversations with him, and his opinion is, well, people were scared of synthesizers, and we use, there's an attitude of everyone's using it. It's a tool, but obviously for music creators, it's scary. So let's just on the music creation stuff. Where do we stand? Do we feel like it's taking away or do we feel like it's increasing the value of real people? Where do we stand on that?
I'll jump in with what I've heard from video game composers. Video game composers, and I think the video game industry in general, because it's quite left-leaning in general, like a lot of them are just not into the idea of AI. And I think that's mainly because they can't see the disconnect between music and then using AI for maybe procedurally generated backgrounds, trees, and stuff like that. And you've got to remember as well, the video game industry has always been using AI. Do you know what I mean? So I think long term, there's probably ways that AI tools can be introduced to like improve workflows and stuff like that. But I think as far as original compositions go, it's not something that I know are being used for AAA games. I think especially with laws ever changing and stuff, I think a lot of developers are kind of like, we don't want to be caught out if we use AI tools and then in the future something happens or whatever. But I think if you're an independent game developer or something, and you want to experiment with these tools and you don't have access to a composer or anything, I think they're growing more popular.
Yeah, whenever I hear AI, there's a little part of me that dies. But I think AI has its place, and it's about assisting in certain things. I think the minute it's creating any kind of art, that's where I start to die. Then whether it's painting or drawing or making music or writing, I think that's stuff that comes from the heart, from the soul. But I do think it has its place in kind of assisting, and so I'm currently on an advisory board for a music tech startup that working on a platform. And I remember when they mentioned AI, that little part of my brain started to die until I realised what they were using it for, and it's nothing to do with creating music. I guess it's a platform where electronic music to start with, but where I guess unsigned producers, electronic artists can actually put their stuff up there, decide whether it's pre-cleared, set what their fees are for sync parameters, and then you can go in there. But the way they're using AI is very interesting. It's more in the sort of finding the right track catalogue, and we were having a interesting chat about this. Is that going to replace the music supervisor? I was like, no. I guess where I can see the benefit of that is, let's say one of the major record labels have got millions of copyrights, quite a small sync team with the best will in the world. Not everyone in that sync team is going to know all that copyright. So it's about, let's do our own searches. We've got a brief come in from such and such video game company or music supervision company. Let's all do our own internal searches like we would do, and then let's just put it through this as well to see if it captures anything else. But the interesting thing with this was, the AI, you're able to type in the brief into the platform. So the AI will read that and then pull the catalog, but you're also able to upload the video, and the tech looks into the content of the video as well and what's actually in the film that you're about to edit music to picture, and that also filters into the search. So it was quite something.
Yeah, that blows my mind slightly. It's the bit where it's looking at the film. It freaks me out.
Yeah, I'm just like, it was one of those. I was like, I'm not even going to ask, how does it work? Because you'll probably talk to me. I go, don't understand what you're saying. It's all magic to me. But, I think that's where there are, the right uses for AI.
Yeah.
You want it to do it. You want it to do stuff that's either helping or stuff that people don't want to do. Get AI to hoover the house. I quite like cleaning it. It's the one time I'm quite zen. But there's a lot of uses that people hate doing. Let's get AI to do that.
Because obviously there's this whole on Spotify perfect fit content. If you know much about that, where they, it's, I can't remember how many tracks are on there. It's millions of it anyway, isn't it? It's like all this stuff, just AI generated music, and how that filters into. So when something's pitched to you, are you sure that it's been created by a person, and how can you be sure of that? Increasingly difficult, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it's a really important time for kind of making sure there are laws against certain things. There's something that came up in Parliament last week, I believe. Uh, there was addressing intellectual property and its use with kind of educating AI, essentially. We're kind of, in a strange way, perhaps like training via our intellectual property, artificial intelligence that might be then replacing us. It sounds very kind of Terminator Skynet to me. So I think now, as we saw in Hollywood last year with the strikes, that AI was a big kind of talking point there as well. I think we have to sort of draw lines in the sand and say what's okay and what isn't. We've been using things for a while as tools, but I think when it comes to the creative industries, we have to protect them and protect the jobs within them. It's already an industry where I feel like there can be a lot of suffering, and this certainly is going to add to that in some way, I think.
Something we've noticed at Laced, and I think this is like a solid argument for all video game studios, like publish your music properly. Like if you don't have the in-house expertise to do that, work with a partner who does. We're seeing a lot of people upload music that's AI created, and then just in the metadata they're putting it's an actual video game composer. And a lot of these game studios are based in Japan and don't actively monitor that kind of stuff. So you can go on Spotify and you can search for like Nintendo soundtracks or the latest Silent Hill soundtrack, and a lot of the stuff that comes up that will just have the composer tagged, but it's just an AI generated song. And it's someone who's just used DistroKid or something just to get music out there and just get it in search terms, because they know, because video game music is so popular now, because video games are so popular, a lot of people are searching for this stuff on Spotify. And if you can just assign a track to a well-known composer and it is not a real song, it can get loads of streams and stuff. So that's something we're coming across in our day-to-day at Laced, where we're having to put so many strikes out at the moment to take this stuff down, because it's basically just piracy, which is really bad.
Yeah, I wonder, because the Spotify's apparently been creating music that they're then they're diverting away from the real artist. Maybe it's them.
Underground conspiracy.
Well, I mean that's probably another subject, but it's not even a conspiracy now, is it? It's
It's out there.
It's just out there. So you've already sort of touched on the mistakes that maybe people can make when they're pitching, maybe not doing their research. Are there other common errors when you're getting pitched to you think, Scott, I mean, you must get that all the time, but how can people kind of avoid the pitfalls of just getting knocked back straight away?
I think something that comes up in the industry a lot is sampling as well, particularly in certain genres where it's quite prolific. There's a lack of understanding about what using a sample in your music means and what's okay and what isn't. So it pays to kind of educate yourself to a certain degree about you don't have to go deep into this, but just a basic understanding of the kind of laws of copyright as well. I think what these guys said earlier about just knowing who you're sending your music to, understanding them, even in a cursory glance at a website and just a basic understanding. I think those are the main things that when you get unsolicited emails that you usually kind of come across. I don't know. Nothing else really comes to mind.
Pitch the right people. Don't go on Twitter or something and just start tweeting an account or something. Go and check out my music. Like, it is relatively easy. I'm guessing you'll be listed as music supervisor on most credits. Like, you can go on. Yeah. There's is it Murby something, and it's basically a credit site.
Murby's Games or
something. Where you can basically type in a video game and that will give you the entire credits, and then just look for a music supervisor. If there's not a music supervisor on there, I guess mainly an audio director in-house, and like they're the people you want to be pitching. Like, don't pitch studio heads. I mean, exception being if it's like a 2-3 person studio, but go after the music supervisors, go after the audio directors, pitch the people who are actual decision makers rather than just randoms, like that information is fairly easy to find.
Yeah, I guess on the gaming side, the only other people that might get slightly involved is maybe a game director and the game producer. But I think if you're going to target anyone, probably the audio director, audio manager is probably the one, because it will all flow through them anyway.
I think the bit of advice I was always given, but it might not stand now. In fact, there was 2 bits of advice. One might not stand. One was about not sending the whole track, but sending the part, not having someone to have a listen to a minute until they get to the bit that's actually suitable, that they really wanted to pitch.
I think
Is that not
well?
standard?
Most of the time, it's easy enough to send your music where the waveform is actually visible, and I find that quite useful when I'm listening to music for the first time. That you can kind of see where the peaks and the troughs are dynamically within the track. But another thing I'll do when I'm pitching is sometimes I'll actually have within the metadata or within the title of the track where it kicks in, or where there's a change in tempo or whatever, just make that really obvious. I don't know that I would find it super useful just to be sent a specific clip of a track. I'd probably want the whole track to
Interesting.
to know. Often with licensing, I'm being asked for music that changes throughout, so that they can, if it's an advert or a trailer or whatever, that they've got different sections of the song to use within the edit. If it's a song that's kind of all on one level that doesn't really change or develop, it's less likely to be of interest, I think.
I think if you're pitching for a trailer as well, obviously make sure you've got stems. Like if you don't, that is like especially important for game trailers and stuff, because of a lot. I mean, I think this is trailers in general, right? But a lot of music that makes it into game trailers, it's never just going to be that song slapped over a game trailer. Someone is normally going to be remixing it and pulling bits out and lifting stuff up according to what's happening in the trailer.
Yeah, trailer music's got very distinct 3 acts in it, so you've got to kind of follow that formula. But yeah, going back to kind of, using a lot of the platforms now where you can see the WAV file. We've been working with a music publisher, curating and creating, I guess, a music library for game trailers and games. And it's very interesting whenever I get any demos through from some of the roster music publisher that we're working with, and some of the roster of the people that I know. Even before I listen to anything, particularly when we're looking at trailer music, I just open it up on Disco and I can see the WAV there, and I can instantly see if it's going to work as a trailer track. You can see that if the 3 acts aren't in there, if it's just a linear track like that, and then I've listened to it go. So yeah, it's quite useful to use those.
Another one that was often told to me, because I remember a band I was managing, there were two mid-tempo, so nothing's going to get used. So how important is tempo? Because we always think of Christmas ads, the sort of, or John Lewis type stuff, or if it's for a big brand, it's like... So tempo, how important is
Yeah,
that?
I mean, all sorts of different tempos get used. It really depends on the pace of the edit and or the scene. Sometimes music's used to make things feel like they're moving more quickly, or to slow down a really fast edit because it's too, I don't know, confusing or whatever. So yeah, I think there's not necessarily a golden BPM. I wouldn't say, but then I'm working across all of these visual industries, so there's a real breadth of.
Because I would imagine in gaming, you're trying to get the adrenaline going, aren't you?
Well, there you go. So a game I worked on probably about 22, 23 years ago, which was one of these kind of simulation games, like, sort of roller coaster tycoon, where you've got this one was called Beach Life. So you were basically building an Ibiza type resort island with resorts and nightclubs and what have you. And the game would go from day to night. So at nighttime, obviously we were licensing club tracks for it, but during the day we were licensing chill out tracks for it. And if someone had said, "Oh, you're going to be licensing chill out music to a video game," I'd have gone. So going back to that point earlier on about, is there a genre that's not? You know what? I'm not sure that there is now. I mean, obviously I love my I love a lot of techno and house and a lot of that stuff, like full-on drum and bass. You know, a full-on linear techno track, I think you're going to have a fairly hard time placing anywhere because it's quite linear. However, you know, a film or a TV series where there's a scene in a club, that would then sit quite nicely in there. So as I say, there's a home for everything, I like to think.
It's all contextual, I think, at the end of the day. Like, I think some of my favourite game trailers are the original Gears of War trailers that use Mad World, and that's a slow, emotional song. Because I think game trailers, you get the initial reveal trailer normally, which is going to maybe have some gameplay footage if it's within like a year of coming out, and that's going to be boom, 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 action, 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 high intensity. And then depending on the game, if you've got like a single player, like action adventure game, but there's a really strong narrative focus there, you're going to have more emotional music. I mean, in the case of Gears of War, it was tapping into like a character who eventually dies in like one of the games kind of thing. And they actually used Madwell because that song became so synonymous with Gears of War, which is mad because it's an 18 plus like graphic, do you know what I mean? Like action horror kind of like third person shooter, but you've got this really emotive song that because that was so popular with the fan base, because it worked, eventually made it into the game itself. So it started off as a trailer music and then actually got synced into the game eventually, which I think was cool. But on your point on context as well, like depending on the game, like there's a game that came out, it's by the creators of Dragon Ball Z, or by the animator, I think, Sand something, and it's just set in a desert. They use Sandstorm by Darude, which is such an insane sync choice, but it worked and it was funny because it fit the trailer. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's always going to depend a lot of the time on the game, but also are you showing off gameplay footage? What's that gameplay footage like? If you're just focusing on character building, narrative, you can get softer songs in there that are slower and stuff like that. So all context dependent, I think.
Do we have any questions from the audience at all? We must have done a really good job in answering everyone's questions, so that's good. Oh, there we go.
I was thinking about this earlier on when you were talking about AI. I'm not really a fan of AI either, but I guess from like working with artists versus working with just music without a sort of creator behind it, like is there also benefits in working with artists because obviously they've got their own fan base and stuff, and they'll bring their own audience. If someone likes a band, they might be more interested in the game, or can it also bring problems when bands, have like bad publicity or whatever?
It's only a matter of, if AI is learning from the rest of us, it's only a matter of time before AI gets ego, which I guess is the only time that I guess dealing with creatives of any sort, can get a bit more challenging. But I think generally things are okay. I love working with real artists. As I say, I think AI has its place and it's to kind of assist in some of the workflow stuff. It isn't to create art, really, for me anyway.
Sorry, go on, Matt.
No, I was going to say on the partnership thing, like to answer that, like there is a very big thing where, so that's part of what I do in my day to day, like it's looking at partnership opportunities within the music industry. And a lot of the studios that we speak to, they want to partner with bands and artists who are genuine fans of their game. So we recently did like a metal arranged album for a game called Cult of the Lamb. We got like Killswitch Engage, Trivium, Polyphia, bands like that. And a lot of those bands were on my hit list initially because I knew they were gamers. And what you'll find is when you partner with people in the music industry, artists, bands who are genuine gamers, they're going to be a lot more open to doing partnership opportunities with like social media and stuff like that. And it just makes those conversations post-launch when you want to push the music out a lot more easier, as opposed to trying to convince a label guy every time, like, can we please get another permission to do that? Sorry, that's going to be an extra 10 grand or whatever else kind of thing. So for partnership specifically, that is something I always look at, where I want to work with bands and artists who are gamers. They don't have to be, but that does make things a lot easier, especially when you're trying to get them to buy into an idea as well, because you don't have to go down the rabbit hole of trying to explain the game and what you're trying to do and stuff like that.
It makes it more authentic, right? It gives it authenticity. You're not trying to put a square peg into a round hole. These people are like, well, I love that game. Right, cool, let's do some stuff together around it.
It makes sense. I think one of the best recent examples Ed Sheeran did a collaboration with the Pokemon company, wrote an original song for the game that made it into the credits at the end of the game. And Sheeran is apparently a massive Pokemon fan, which I didn't know, but makes sense because he's like that age kind of thing. But he put so much, like his Instagram for like an entire week was just look at me with like hundreds of Pokemon plushies, like stuff like that. And Pokemon fans saw that. And if they were a fan of Sheeran, they probably were afterwards because it made sense. And I think gamers are quite, that's important to them. I think something needs to make sense. It needs to fit.
Yeah, so I was going to ask a question, actually prompted by that a little bit. So when music's being pitched to you, how important is the profile of that artist outside of film, games, whatever? You know, their social media presence, what's the story moving forward? Does it look like you might be supporting someone who might blow up at some point? How much does that come into the equation when choosing the track?
If they're a big artist, it's obviously going to give us a reason to get in touch with the client at the studio and be like, these guys want to do something and you would be foolish to say no, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Because stuff like that is a lot harder. But if something is the right fit, like if I get pitched a partnership opportunity from an independent artist, but they've got really cool music and it really, really fits with the game, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to explore that. Like at the end of the day, it's always about the music and the quality of the music. Like the artist fit and everything else, like that is important. But first and foremost is, does this music work well? Is this artist the right match for the video game IP or the franchise? If it's a yes to both of those, it's a definite. But yeah, the music is the most important thing. So you don't have to be the biggest act in the world to get your music in a video game. Sometimes if something just makes sense and works, it works.
Anything to add to that? No?
Yeah, I think from an artist perspective, I think sync is always feels like kind of a bonus to me. It's not necessarily. I think you make your art, and then if it happens to be the right fit for a certain project, then that's great. But you're ultimately making for it to be, you know, a genuine thing. You're making it for you first and foremost, you know. And then if I think it's nice if these collaborations happen if that's what you want. But ultimately, you know, you do your thing, and then people gravitate towards that because it's, you know, universality is specificity. So you be as much you as you can, and then, you know, I mean, speaking from my own experience as well, that's definitely what happened. As soon as you kind of narrow down and focus on what is specific to you, that's when people start to gravitate towards the art that you create, instead of trying to broaden it and appeal to more people. I think go the opposite way.
Now, every student-facing panel has to, by law, end on the same question. So I'm going to ask that question, and it's the little bit of advice you would give to anyone entering this world, either to be a supervisor or pitching music. If there's anything at the forefront of your mind, you think that's the key bit of advice, Matt, what would it be?
Be curious, ask questions, email people. It's the one thing I learned as a freelance journalist, like getting responses back from people like, holy shit, I can't believe this person replied to me. Like a lot of people working within music, within games are genuinely really nice people and will have the time to reply to, like you were saying, you reply to a lot of the messages that you get. Like if you've shown you've done your work and you're not just like emailing hundreds of people every day, like you will get responses. So I think be curious, ask questions, show that you care, and also show that you've done your research, and I think you'll get a long way.
For me, it's probably a couple of things. I'm a big fan of going to conferences, because in those places you can really network. You know, you can be sitting, watching a panel. At the end of the panel, there'll be some Q's and A's. You usually get a chance to go up to panelists, ask questions. You might bump into them in the bar, in the cafe down the road. You know, that's the time. Some of the most exciting work that I've ever got has been off the back of a drink, game developers conference in San Francisco in a bar at 3 o'clock in the morning, chatting to someone at the bar. That, oh, what do you do? Oh, yeah, well, I'm the director of a development studio. Oh, what do you? I'm a music supervisor. Swap cards, and then 6 months later, they'll get, we've got this thing. Can we remember? You were the guy that passed out on the way out. That, you know. So that's one of those things. And I guess as well, if you, and this is where I think my views on it are very different from others. If you're trying to get into a particular media, whether it's games, film, TV, and you're creating music, you know, it's kind of a chicken and egg, right? So, oh, what have you done before? Well, I haven't done anything before. I'm a big fan of composers, music makers that take the initiative to, I haven't done anything, but you know what, when I get into games or adverts or film and TV, I've gone onto YouTube, I've pulled a bunch of trailers off without the sound on, that I haven't listened to it, and then I've gone in and scored that trailer myself. As I say, I've heard other supervisors go, oh, it's a bit arrogant. Depends how you present yourself, right? If you go, oh, I thought all that stuff was shit, so I decided to rescore it myself because I'm amazing, fine, that's arrogant. But if you go, look, I haven't done anything yet, so I just wanted to kind of show what I can do, hone my craft, because the more of that you do, the more you're honing your craft. And then you've got a bit of a resume, a bit of a show reel, even though you might not have had paid work. For me, it shows passion, initiative, and a bit of drive. So, you know, I think that's a good thing too.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, I think the networking is a big part of it. I think if you can get actual face-to-face time with people who work in the industry, then that's invaluable. There are events that are more like social events that you can go to. You don't have to pay to enter. You don't have to. There are some events that I'm really not a fan of where you actually have to like pay to sit down with music supervisors, and I wouldn't advise that you do anything like that. But there are more, kind of informal social gatherings, and if you can go and make an impression on somebody there, and just be open, be curious, and be respectful, and you know, speak to some people, and that's how you find opportunities. It's I wasn't necessarily like the best at networking, to be honest, before I like started in this industry, but it's a skill that I've managed to kind of hone the longer I've been in it, and I think it is kind of an important one for an industry like this.
Yeah.
Just being able to, you know, speak confidently about and be knowledgeable about the things that you're passionate about. You know, if you're everybody who works in sync is, you know, a music fan. I think there's not really anybody who gets in it and is like, oh god, I hate music. It's usually because first and foremost they're a really big fan of music and they listened to a lot of music when they were growing up and went to gigs, and maybe they're artists themselves, you know. So if you know a lot about the stuff that you're passionate about, then go and share that with people in the industry, and they'll be, you know, hopefully they'll be impressed and there'll be an opportunity there.
I think you guys are lucky as well, because Dave, you were saying you've got games people and music people in this. That's a rarity, like to have an environment where you're working, but you've got game people in one room and music people in the other room. Like if you're not already, like chat to each other, like look to where you can support each other, because that's part, you know, there's stuff there already. There might be a game developer who needs music, or you're a composer and you're looking to get your music into a game. Like you've got an environment here where you can partner and do stuff like that. So that's really cool. Make the most of that.
Yeah. And further to that, you know, you've got these guys that are coming in and speaking to you, and you're a few meters away from them, and you can come and speak to them afterwards. You know, I had to go through the pain of managing bands to meet people like this. So, and get grey hair in the process. So, anyway, so thank you guys. Really great insights, really interesting. I always learn a lot from these panels, you know, from the answers you guys give. So thank you so much. Have a round of applause.